And thank you again all for being here. So hello and welcome to the pre-conference session for the 2021 ALAO conference. I'm so excited to see everybody and I'm so excited to get this started. So I'm Jess Crossville McIntosh, the 21-22 president of ALAO, and I'm really thrilled to welcome you all here to listen to our wonderful pre-conference speaker. I'm going to share a couple reminders before we start. Please feel free to ask questions in the chat. These will be monitored and shared with Fabatsi at the end of her talk. The session is live, but we are recording it, and it will be added to the website later. Another reminder, we will be having a new member orientation after Fabatsi's talk at 5 p.m. with our wonderful membership chair, Maureen. Any and all members are welcome to attend. And finally, I look forward to seeing everyone at 9 a.m. tomorrow for day one of the conference. But today, now, I'm thrilled to introduce our pre-conference speaker, Fabatsi Michelle Itar, as she presents Loving Thy Neighbor, Creating Coalitions and Deconstructing Vocational Law. Fabatsi is an independent scholar and PhD candidate at the iSchool at the University of Illinois, Urbana-Champaign. Her research is concerned with the relationships and tensions between the espoused values of librarianship and the realities present in the experiences of marginalized librarians and library users. In 2018, she coined the term and defined the concept of vocational awe, which describe the set of ideas, values, and assumptions librarians have about themselves and the profession that result in beliefs that libraries as institutions are inherently good and sacred and therefore beyond critique. In her article, Vocational Awe, The Lies We Tell Ourselves, she describes how vocational awe can lead to burnout and a sense that one's own self-care is less important than the work being done. And really, there could be no more relevant a talk for us to have at this moment in time. So thank you so much, Fabatsi, and welcome. And you should have sharing screen capabilities.
All right, everyone. Hello and welcome. I'm going to share my screen now. All right, so let me get it in present mode. Can everyone see the screen and the presentation?
Yes, we can see it.
All right, great. Okay, I'm just gonna pull up my notes really quick, but while I do that, I just wanna say thank you all so much for being here, especially, on the very first session, like the very first day before the conference even really starts. I really appreciate you all being here and sharing this with me. Okay, finally got my notes. Of course, it's always one of those things where you think you have everything ready until it actually starts and then nothing is actually prepared. Okay. So yes, I have a very lovely introduction, but as was said, my presentation is Loving Thy Neighbor, Creating Coalitions, and Deconstructing Vocational Awe. You can find me at these places. I'm Fob Itar on Twitter. That's where I do a lot of my shorthand talks and conversations, and honestly, where I spend the most time. So please feel free to live tweet this session. Feel free to me. Feel free to ask me questions and make comments, both throughout the session and afterward. I also have a website and a blog, and that's where I tend to do my more long form things that are too long for Twitter. And finally, I have my email address. Uh, like I'm sure many other people in the room, I am definitely a little overwhelmed with this year, so answering emails may take a little bit more time than some of the other places that you can contact me, but for sure, I will definitely contact you back. Okay, so before we begin, I just wanted to say that, the motto for this conference is building bridges, dialogues, deliberation, and oh, I put dialogue twice, but in academic libraries. And so throughout this conference, we'll be talking about some of the ways that libraries and academic libraries in particular have connected with their communities and created strong coalitions. But hopefully, we will also be talking as well throughout the conference about the areas of growth that are needed for librarianship in order to really reach everyone that we say that we reach. And so, today I'll be talking about vocational awe and the problem with the do what you love framework. And these two phenomenons really have a strong underpinning of the narrative of librarianship. And while the stories that we tell about ourselves and librarianship can define us, they can also confine us. And so, as I start to break some of these major narratives down, the things that we have taken for granted as truth, it can cause some defensiveness. And that's, totally normal, totally common. Um, I would never, of course, say not to feel your feelings. I'm just saying that as we start to break down these common narratives, it can cause it. And I would just ask you to embrace it. Just like with growing pains, these are the things necessary to continue to cause growth in ourselves and in the field. Which leads me, to my next point. Feelings are great, but actions are better. Oftentimes, the conversation stops with the defensiveness, with the discomfort, and then the conversation becomes how can we make ourselves feel better? Again, I would never want to say not to try and feel better, not to feel discomfort, but think about ways that we can move those feelings towards actionable items, towards ways that we can think about it in more productive and constructive ways, rather than stopping just at unruffling feathers, as it were. And so, before I begin, it may be weird to talk about at a library conference who I am outside of librarianship, but I think it's really important and you'll see why. So, who am I? Who am I outside of librarianship? Well, I'm a cis woman. I am queer. I am a wife, a sister, an activist, a scholar, and many more. And, of course, I'm also a librarian, but these are all of the things that make up who I am outside of librarianship as well. And I think it's important for us to remember that librarianship is not all that we are. It isn't the sole purpose of why we get up in the morning. And so, what does it mean to love what you do? What does it mean to love libraries? Well, I'm sure many of us have heard this saying or something close to this, right? Choose a job you love and you'll never have to work a day in your life. The sentiment basically boils down to the idea that love and passion can make anything, even work, feel like play. And because of this love and passion, these ideal workers become successful precisely because they love their job, because they love what they do. To them, their job duties are in fact the most perfect and pleasurable way for them to spend their time between the hours of 9 to 5 or whatever their work hours may be. Scholar Mia Tokumitsu has written a lot about the Do What You Love framework, and I would encourage checking out her work. And so, what does this mean? What does the Do What You Love framework tell us? It tells us basically that you are your work and your work is you. It often conflates or even subsumes your entire identity. And the point often is to monetize your love and passion for the organization and share that love with the customer or the patron. You know, whether it's the emphasis on always smiling to all the patrons that you work with, the amount of emotional labor to ensure that all of your interactions with your patrons are pleasant and helpful in a way that they feel like they're really getting to know you as a person, an emphasis on a parasocial relationship. And so when we're talking about vocational awe, this is a question I always like to bring up. Is librarianship an occupation or a vocation? While at first these might seem like the same thing, right? There are technically synonyms, but when we're talking about the two things, right, an occupation is the work in which a person is employed, whereas a vocation is a summons or a strong inclination to our particular action or state of course, usually in the religious sense. One of its earliest denotations, a vocation literally meant the ways in which you respond to God's call. So while you can have an occupation at home, a vocation is forever. I'm a pastor's kid. Shout out to any pastor's kids that might be in the audience. There's usually at least one, so hello. And so, as any PK knows, while you might leave church, church never really leaves you. Whether you might be in the building or not, everything in your life kind of revolves around church, whether it's Sunday schools, Bible studies, women's retreats, even vacation Bible schools during the summer. And so, thinking about all of this, I ask again, is librarianship an occupation or a vocation? And unfortunately, as we can see from the response to COVID-19, librarianship is very much treated as a vocation. This is a quote from Michael Crichton: "Civilized nations build libraries. Lands that have lost their souls close them down." So over 2 years into the pandemic now, almost 3 full school years, and there are still libraries that have never closed their doors, partly because of sentiments like this, that it causes somehow a collapse of the soul of their community, of their neighborhood to not be open. In many states, it took advocacy from unions and government entities to give libraries a legitimate reason to shut down. The idea that libraries are so vital to democracy and civilization that closing them down would be a crime against the nation, against the community, is no doubt the driving force behind the decisions that have been and are continuing to be made in regards to COVID and policies surrounding the opening of the library. In more extreme cases, like the Chicago Public Library, the commissioner, Andrea Telly, thanked the workers for their dedication during the crisis, despite the fact that they were not even allowed to work from home unless they used their own sick or personal days. There was no recourse in terms of doing anything that would actually allow themselves to be supported as library workers. Again, it took Mayor Lightfoot and multiple ProPublica articles talking about their struggles in order for Chicago Public to finally close. And since then, they have, of course, reopened and were one of the first libraries to reopen. When it came to the vaccines, while libraries in both academic and public spaces, I know in New Jersey, where I was working and where I grew up, it took the governor to specifically say, and libraries on college campuses in order for places like Rutgers to close, because they tried to advocate for libraries being considered essential workers. Though, of course, when it came to vaccine rollout, we weren't considered in the 1B category to be one of the first groups to have the vaccines. So we're essential when it means that we can be in the community longer, but we're not essential when it means that we can actually protect ourselves and our families against a deadly virus. And so, what is vocational awe? What does it actually mean? Vocational awe describes the set of ideas, values, and assumptions librarians have about themselves and the profession that result in notions that libraries as institutions are inherently good and sacred, and therefore beyond critique. And so to break this down a little, libraries are inherently good. They provide access to all. They have diverse collections. They champion truth and free speech, unless, of course, they're undesirable. We downplay the segregation of libraries. Many libraries, in fact, closed rather than integrate. When we talk about segregated spaces, even then we talk more about the public libraries. But for instance, the Tougaloo nine students at Tougaloo College were arrested for peacefully trying to use the main library or the white library on campus instead of their lesser funded, lesser supplied Negro library. And even moving beyond segregation, there are many policies even now that show that when it comes to diverse collections, we are still very much behind. There are all of the different libraries right now that are fighting to keep queer books in their stacks without being arrested for it. Libraries are inherently sacred. They tend to be sanctuaries and safe spaces. They're holy and inspiring spaces. For those whom we deem worthy, for the privileged. We often talk about libraries such as Ferguson and how they stayed open during all of the protests, but we don't talk about the more common thing where libraries stay open to hate groups such as Nazis, such as Proud Boys and TERFs, and the many libraries who, through both siding and neutrality, allow for hate speech and hateful rhetoric to be promoted even within the libraries. When we're talking about a safe space, it cannot truly be a safe space for everyone if it's a safe space for Nazis and TERFs, because then only those who can either pass as whatever it might be, whether it's straight or white or Christian or whatever it might be, cis, only those who can pass and those who are not actively harmed by those hateful ideologies can safely be in spaces like that. And finally, when we're talking about libraries being beyond critique because they're the last bastions of democracy, the soul of the community, we neglect to mention how libraries most often uphold white supremacy and white supremacy culture, and even ignore more valid critiques like unfair labor practices. And in truth, no institution that doesn't listen to the people, to its workers, to all voices can be seen as a democratic institution. No democracy suppresses voices that make people uncomfortable. By saying that, by ignoring how these critiques are important because of how democratic or whatever the soul of the community the library is, it is in fact eroding democracy and proving that it is less than a democratic institution. And so what are the commonalities between the Do What You Love framework and vocational awe? Well, for one, there's definitely a sense of religion and spirituality with the two of them. The idea that work has become almost a philosophy, has become almost a sense of self. There is definitely a conflation between the building or the organization and the workers themselves. Often we talk about the good that the library has done, when in fact, right, the library, in many cases, is just a building. It's the workers who are doing the programming, who are making sure the shelves are stacked with great materials. It's the workers who are actually doing the great things that we're talking about. When it comes to love and passion, there's definitely a commonality in that these things equal worth or equal efficacy. All of these things are built to run specifically on love and passion. Without that love, there would be no soul or no refuge or safe space. And finally, and perhaps most importantly, the idea that love for work and the importance of work means that one isn't allowed to critique the institution or the organization, and that one isn't allowed to complain in any shape or any form, which is, as I mentioned, right, in fact, does the opposite of what it is supposedly supposed to do, right? Which is to make sure that we all actually feel supported and welcome in our jobs, in our spaces. And so, what does this mean? How does this break down in real life? How does the do what you love mindset and vocational awe play out in the workplace? Well, here is what I like to call the cycle of exploitation. You start off with recruitment. A passionate worker is hired. Then a worker is put through many types of abuse and low morale experiences. This continues until burnout, when the worker either retires or leaves for a different organization or perhaps even a different field, which either the circle starts anew and another passionate worker is hired, or their work is shuffled onto the people remaining, therefore increasing the amount of abuse that and low morale experiences that they will undergo, which of course again leads to a higher chance of burnout, and so the cycle continues. And so you can wave your hand or put yeses in the chat, whatever it might be, but wave your hand if you've ever heard and or said one or more of the following. I usually work through lunch, work late. I'm addicted to checking email. I check and answer my email all the time. I feel guilty whenever I take sick and or vacation days. I know that I, for one, have said things like this. And it can be hard even now not to say these things. And with those of us who are working from home, it can be even harder to have that work-life separation because there is no physical boundaries between your work and your life. Job creep. I'm sure we've all been told to do something, other duties as assigned, right? And for a while, at least those other duties as assigned related to librarianship in some ways. But now, especially with the pandemic, especially with COVID, we as librarians and library workers have seen that those other duties as assigned that become a regular part of your day are farther and farther away from what it means to be a librarian. We're being asked to be social workers. We're being asked to be EMTs, therapists, legal consultants, accountants. Many library workers are sent out to other social services, food banks, retirement homes. In San Francisco, the library workers had to basically act as childcare for the children of other essential workers. All of these things that are becoming more and more a part of our daily lives have very little to do with the core missions of libraries. Which, of course, all of these things, what do they lead to? burnout, a state of exhaustion in which one is cynical about the value of one's occupation and doubtful of one's capacity to perform. This quote is from Christina Masloch, one of the germinal scholars of burnout, especially in the workplace. And so, what causes, again, this burnout? On top of the job creep, on top of the lack of work life separation, it's a lot of this do what you love bleeding into our everyday job duties, our everyday lives, the emotional labor it takes to maintain happiness for your patrons, to maintain a pleasant and pleasurable environment, the amount of invisible labor it takes to keep a library running that often isn't rewarded. The, as I said, job creep, which leads to heavy workloads. And all of this, of course, with a lack of institutional support. The idea that because we love what we do, because we love libraries, that we are more than happy to take on all of this work, that we don't actually need institutional support because the love of the job, the love of work is the support that we need, the support given. Which, of course, is not true. And yet, because this is the dominant narrative, it can seem ungrateful to speak out and say that I need support from my organization. And now, of course, all of that was happening and what happens in March of 2020, the pandemic. I want us all to take just a minute or two to reflect on your library's, your organization's COVID-19 response. What has your library done? What was the original reaction? How long did it take to close, if it ever did? What rights as library workers did you receive, if you've received any, in terms of working from home, in terms of not having to, in being provided with PPE, and perhaps offsetting the cost of the electrical bills, since, of course, things like that, when you're using the building's electric, you're not paying for that. But now, when we're at home, as our bills are going up, or our phone bills even, have any of that been offset by your organization? When it came to reopening, did they allow you to continue to work from home, or have you all been forced into the building? Were you considered 1B and able to get the vaccine and or boosts early? Do you have to enforce mask mandates? I'll give everyone just a minute to think about what the library has done, not for the community, not for the patrons, because again, we all know that libraries, and by libraries, we of course mean library workers, bend over backward to make sure our communities are set. But what has the library, whether it's the administration or whomever, what have they done to make sure that you as the worker feel safe and secure? Throughout this pandemic, do you feel like your library, your organization has listened to the needs of you and your fellow workers? If so, why not? And what do you think they could do to make you feel more protected? And so, if we look at all that I have talked about and all that we have seen and are seeing with libraries and librarianship, the cost of our service is a lot, isn't it? The current normal isn't very normal at all. Exploitation and abuse are the norms, and burnout is now the best case scenario, with death being a not so hypothetical end to a library career. Is this the normal that we want to continue to have? Is this the structure and norms that we want to set and continue to set? As we rush back to normal, as we go full speed ahead to a post pandemic library life, to a librarianship, is this what we want to continue to what? To have, to reinforce, to make it for the next generation of library workers? Of course not. And so, what does it mean to love yourself as you love thy neighbor? Right? The name of this talk is Loving Thy Neighbor, right? And it's based on the biblical saying, or can't remember the word right now, but the idea that you love your neighbor as yourself. So you help the others around you as you would help your own self. And so in every talk, I always try and have this quote because I think it's so important. Caring for myself is not self indulgence, it is self preservation. And that is an act of political warfare by Audre Lorde. The first and most important thing is to take this quote to heart. Caring for yourself is not self indulgence. Loving yourself is not selfish. It is self preservation. It is a political and radical act. And not only that, it is necessary for survival, just like food, water, shelter. Self is something that cannot be dismissed or ignored. Libraries are a not a vocation. They are libraries. Librarianship is a profession. It's an occupation. It does not need to be your whole life. In fact, it very well should not be your whole life. You are important too. And so, how do we start? Well, first thing, set boundaries. As important as job duties might seem, they can wait. Set aside time for your life, your loved ones, your hobbies, whatever it might be. There is no such thing as a library emergency. I will say that again. There is no such thing as a library emergency unless the building is on like fire or something, in which case, why aren't you the firefighters? Why aren't you calling emergency services? Anything can wait until 9 a.m. the next morning or day morning or whatever your hours might be, right? And then working collectively. It can be hard to set boundaries and stick to something new without help. And so, regardless of if you're in a unionized place or not, organize with your coworkers to set and maintain a life outside of work. Whether that's deleting your email off your phone, whether it's taking your full lunch break, working with others will make it easier to, as a collective, as a coalition, create healthier boundaries for work, for yourself, for your life. And so here are some of the resources that I mentioned. There's the article about vocational awe that talks about, how libraries sort of created this notion of vocational awe and how it's been played out throughout the very beginning of librarianship till now. And Katrina Kendrick Davis and low morale experiences. When we talk about the abuse and the low morale experiences that lead to burnout, she is like the primary expert, and she's always doing more research about it. So definitely look her up, and maybe you can even participate in some of the research that she's doing. And so thank you so much. Again, here are the places that you can find me. Twitter, my email, and my website. Sorry, brain spaz right there. Thank you all so much.
Thank you, Fabatsi. Can you all hear me now?
Mhm. I just put the resources into the chat.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. So I would say that we would welcome any questions at this time. Thank you so much, Fabatsi, for that talk. It's a lot of introspection and thinking about what we've all been through in the last couple of years and our roles in our libraries and institutions. So I can start with a question, but again, welcome any questions for the remaining 12 minutes of our time. So I know you did talk about the pandemic and how it impacted your work with vocational awe, as that paper was written prior to COVID. So in the ways that we can try and really think about ourselves and how we can make our work-life balance better, do you have recommendations of first steps that we can take?
Yeah. So again, I really think that something as simple as deleting Outlook or Gmail off of your phone can be really important. My friend and professional colleague, Charlotte Rowe, she has it in her signature that she does not respond to emails outside of work hours. I think that's something that is very important to set as a precedent, to say that, again, there is no such thing as a library emergency. Everything can wait until whenever I'm back on the clock, as it were. Another, I think it's Anna, and I can't remember her last name right now. But her signature is, my work hours may not be your work hours. Please feel free to reply during your own work hours. And so again, it's setting that boundary to say, yeah, yes, I might be sending this to you at 9 p.m., but maybe my work hours today was something like, you know, 2 to 9 rather than a 9 to 5. So saying like, yes, it may seem like I'm doing this late, but this is well within my own work hours, but please feel free to reply within yours. Another thing is to take the full break or prep or whatever you need. I used to be a school librarian, and in the schools, they like drill it into you basically to take your full prep period, to take your full lunch break, so that when it comes time to renegotiating during union and management, they can't take those times away from you by saying like, oh, well, it doesn't seem like you use it anyway. And so even I actually put like an hour, like at 12 p.m., unless I have meetings during that day, but I put it in my schedule, 12 to 1 lunch every single workday, because it is important. Otherwise it can be really hard not to work through your lunch, or take more of a working lunch. And we, especially in academia, with the idea that you just work until the work is done, it can be very easy to work through any and all breaks that you have. So yeah, those are two simple things that you can do to start.
Yeah, I think that those are really great suggestions for ways to sort of separate home and work. And I agree, I said in the chat that the working at home and separating that does make it a little bit more challenging, but I like the idea of designating time in your calendar and your schedule and sticking to it. I think that that's one thing too that I see sometimes people will do that, but then not always stick to their schedule. So I would add, if unless anybody else has a question, that if you're in an environment where perhaps you're not seeing or feeling the space to do those types of things with management, do you have any advice for ways to talk to your director or other managers about what you might need for your own personal well-being?
Yeah, it can definitely be hard to, again, set and maintain those boundaries if you are in a space where management might not be as on board, as it were. And so I always like to say, just like how you can change your lesson plan towards different groups of students, right? You might teach finding library services to a group of engineers differently than you would to a group of English majors versus a group of medical students. Using those same skills when you're talking to your boss or administration. So knowing what sort of words and language works best with administration. Some you can take, the purely neoliberal standpoint and say things like, studies show that workers who actually have lots of breaks and institutional support are 20% more productive than workers who aren't, things like that. And so framing it in a way so that it doesn't seem like you're doing it to be lazy or you're doing it because you need some sort of special handout, and instead framing it like something will boost the productivity of the workers, that will boost the productivity of the organization, or whatever other sort of buzzwords that your admin might like to use. Because, I mean, at the end of the day, it is true. As workers, we do better when we're well rested, we do better when we're well fed, when we actually have the space to go on vacations, to recharge, to reboot. No one is their very best self when they've been overworked, when they've been have 10 plates spinning at the same time. And so whatever language best works for your organization or for your own dean or director, whoever it might be, just taking those same concepts and that you use for your students or you use for wrangling itinerant faculty, and applying it there is what I would say.
Wonderful. Well, thank you. And thank you so much for this talk today. It was so, again, thoughtful and introspective, but also gave, I think, people really good tools to try and improve things in their work-life balance. I heard you speak at ACRL a couple of years ago, and it was just standing room only. And so I was really thrilled to hear you speak again today. I think we might have one comment. I encourage longtime employees to take their full sick time. They're reluctant because the more sick time they have, the larger their pension payments will be. Oh my goodness. But I think that too, you'll work with people who've been in an institution and they have, hundreds and hundreds and hours of sick time, but we earn it to use it. So I think that's a really helpful comment.
Yeah, especially since, some organizations don't necessarily have sick leave policies. Um, one of my mentors and close friend works at Temple, and Temple has a draconian sick leave where library faculty earn 10 days of sick leave a year, but are only allowed to use 6 before they start to undergo disciplinary action. And so if you have it, I think it's always so important, again, to use it because, it shows solidarity to not just the other workers in your organization, but perhaps even in the university. That's another way to think about it. Just like, yes, I myself may not be, disabled or whatever it is, but what can I do to help my fellow coworkers? Again, librarianship, they always emphasize how much like we bend over backwards for our patron and our, whether it be faculty, students, outside staff, but they very rarely talk about extending that grace to the other workers in our own building, in our own unit. And so, again, loving thy neighbor is fine, but thinking about how the grace that you would want extended to you if you were going through something. That's what you have to try and remember when you're trying to set those boundaries for yourself and for the organization. A truly healthy organization is one that allows for all different types of people to work there successfully. Whereas right now, with the job creep, with the work life separation, people who have children, people who are disabled, people who are taking care of elderly family or friends or whatever, there are just so many different types of people who are seen as less effective or less able to be a librarian or a library worker just because they value having time outside the workplace. And that's just not that's not a way to actually build coalitions with our communities and with other organizations around us.
Thank you again so much. This was really wonderful. We're just at 4:30. So if you have additional questions or thoughts you want to share with Fabatsi, her contact information was shared. And I am so thankful to everyone who joined us today. I would also can't wait to see everybody bright and early tomorrow at 9 a.m. as we kick off day one of our conference. So thank you so much, Fabatsi.
Thank you. Thank you all for being here and listening.
Have a wonderful evening, everyone.